My name is Audrey Collins. I am 24 years old, and the first time my mother called me in 3 years, she did not ask how I had been, whether I was safe, or why her daughter had disappeared from the family without a trace. She called because she had just seen a photo of me on a yacht. I was standing on the deck in San Diego with the ocean behind me, smiling on my birthday like I had finally made peace with the life I built without them. For a few seconds, her voice sounded soft, almost careful, like she wanted to pretend this was a normal conversation between a mother and daughter. Then she got to the point. She wanted me to sell it and help my brother. I actually laughed, because nothing explains a family faster than the moment they suddenly remember you, only after seeing proof that you have something they want. 3 years earlier, the same people had no problem pushing me out of their house in Pittsburgh and carrying on like I had never existed. No calls, no birthdays, no checking in when I was broke, sick, or barely holding myself together. They made it clear that as long as my older brother needed money, attention, and second chances, there was nothing left in that family for me. But the second my photo went up, everything changed. My mother started talking about family. My father was already shouting in the background before I could finish a sentence. And 3 days later, the people who had erased me from their lives were standing at my door, asking me for help like they had every right to it. What they did not understand was that I was not the same girl they threw away, and before this story is over, you will understand why what I said next left every one of them speechless. Before we go any further, tell me where you're listening from and what the weather is like where you are right now, because this story starts in the cold, but it does not stay there for long. 3 years before that phone call, I was still living in my parents' house outside Pittsburgh, still making the mistake of believing that if I worked hard enough and stayed quiet enough, eventually they would see me as more than the extra child in the room. My brother Brandon had always been the center of gravity in our family. Every crisis bent around him. Every holiday turned into a conversation about his future, his stress, his ideas, his setbacks, and whatever new dream my parents had decided to finance for him. By the time I was 21, I had learned to expect it. What I had not expected was how quickly they would turn on me the first time I refused to sacrifice my own future for his. I was finishing school and trying to hold together a part-time job, a heavy class load, and a plan for getting out on my own. Brandon had this big idea for a coffee shop. He talked about it like it was guaranteed to succeed, like all he needed was support, and everyone else should be grateful to help build his empire. My parents were completely taken in by it. They had already put money into his business plan, covered bills he should have handled himself, and spent months treating him like some misunderstood genius who just needed one real chance. Then one night over dinner, they told me what they had decided. They wanted me to pause school, give up my savings, and work at Brandon's future shop for free until it turned profitable. They said families pull together. They said I was young enough to recover. They said Brandon's opportunity mattered more because he had bigger responsibilities ahead of him. I remember sitting there staring at them, waiting for the part where someone smiled and admitted this was insane. It never came. When I said no, the whole room changed. My mother looked at me like I had betrayed her. My father's face went hard in that cold, quiet way that always meant he had already chosen a side. Brandon leaned back in his chair like I was the selfish one, like I was standing between him and the life he deserved. That argument lasted less than 20 minutes, but it changed everything. By the end of the night, my father told me if I cared so little about this family, then maybe I should stop living under his roof. My mother did not stop him. Brandon did not defend me, and just like that, I was packing a duffel bag, while the people who were supposed to love me most acted like I had forced their hand. I left with a small suitcase, a backpack, and just enough money to survive if nothing went wrong. Of course, everything went wrong. Over the next few weeks, I slept on a friend's couch, picked up extra shifts anywhere I could, and kept checking my phone like maybe somebody would come to their senses. Nobody did. No apology. No message asking where I was. No offer to help. It was like the second I stopped being useful, I stopped being family. That was the part that hurt the most. Not getting kicked out. Not the money. Not even the panic of trying to survive. It was realizing how easy it was for them to erase me. And once I understood that, something inside me changed. I stopped waiting to be chosen. I stopped imagining some dramatic moment where they would suddenly regret what they had done. I started thinking about one thing only: how to build a life so solid that nobody could ever corner me, control me, or throw me away again. The first year on my own was not inspiring. It was not the kind of struggle people turn into cute motivational quotes after everything works out. It was exhausting, humiliating, and lonely in ways I had never been prepared for. I took whatever work I could get and stopped caring whether it matched the degree I was trying to finish or the life I thought I was supposed to have. When a former classmate told me about an opening at a waterfront restaurant in San Diego, I took the chance before I could talk myself out of it. I sold what little I had, bought a one-way ticket, and told myself that if I was going to start over, I might as well do it somewhere far enough away that nobody could drag me backward. San Diego was beautiful in the way a place can be when you are too stressed to enjoy it. The ocean was there, the boats were there, the sunsets were there, but most days I saw them through the haze of double shifts and unpaid bills. I started as a hostess at a busy place near the marina, smiling at tourists while my feet ached and my bank account hovered near empty. But being around the harbor changed something in me. I became obsessed with how everything worked: the charter schedules, the dock crews, the maintenance calls, the last-minute cancellations, the wealthy clients who wanted everything handled perfectly without ever seeing the chaos behind it. I asked questions constantly. I watched the captains, the booking managers, the mechanics, anyone who knew something I did not. Within months, I moved from the restaurant into a front desk role for a small charter company that rented out boats for sunset cruises, birthdays, proposals, and corporate events. It was not glamorous work. It was long days, impatient customers, and nonstop problem solving. But for the first time in a long time, I felt useful in a way that belonged to me. Nobody was asking me to make myself smaller so someone else could shine. The harder I worked, the more I learned. The more I learned, the more valuable I became. I studied contracts, fuel costs, weather policies, docking fees, and customer retention like my future depended on it, because it did. By the time I was 23, I was helping manage bookings, upselling private packages, and spotting mistakes before the owners did. I also started saving aggressively. No shopping, no expensive nights out, no emotional spending. Every extra dollar went into a plan I had not fully said out loud yet. I wanted something of my own. Not an apartment, not a title, not a temporary promotion someone could take away. I wanted an asset, something real, something that floated, ironically, better than my family ever had. The yacht did not happen overnight. It started with an older vessel that most people would have walked past without a second glance. The paint was worn, the interior needed work, and everybody who saw it first saw a problem. I saw potential. I bought it with savings, financing, and more nerve than I probably had any right to claim. Then I rebuilt it piece by piece, spending nights comparing materials, calling repair crews, negotiating service rates, and learning every corner of that business from the inside out. When it was finally ready, it was not just a boat, it was proof. Proof that I could create something elegant out of what other people had written off. Proof that the girl they shoved out the door in Pittsburgh had not disappeared. She had just rebuilt herself somewhere they could not imagine. On the morning of my 24th birthday, I stood on the deck, looked at that water, and took the photo that would bring my family crashing back into my life. I posted that photo with a simple caption and did not think much about it after that. It was my birthday, the sky was clear, the water behind me looked like polished glass, and for the first time in years, I let myself enjoy what I had built without worrying that somebody would ruin the moment. I was not trying to show off. I was not sending a message to anyone back in Pittsburgh. In my mind, that chapter of my life was closed. The people who had cut me off had made their choice, and I had made mine. I honestly believed those worlds would never touch each other again. Then my phone started ringing. I looked down, saw my mother's name on the screen, and for a second I genuinely thought I was imagining it. 3 years of silence, and suddenly there she was, calling like no time had passed at all. I stared at it until it almost stopped, then answered, mostly because I wanted to hear what could possibly be so important that it had finally broken through all that silence. Her voice came in soft and careful, the kind people use when they are trying to sound loving on purpose. She said hello, like we had talked last week. She asked how I was doing. She told me I looked beautiful in the picture. It was so unnatural that it made the back of my neck tense up. I could hear the performance in every word. I did not help her. I did not fill the silence. I just waited. It took less than a minute for her to get there. She said Brandon was having a hard time. She said the coffee business had hit a rough patch. She said things were more complicated than I understood, and the family was under enormous pressure. Then she took a breath and said what she had really called to say. She wanted me to sell the yacht and help my brother before everything collapsed. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so shameless I did not know what else to do. 3 years earlier, I had been sleeping on a borrowed couch and wondering whether I could afford groceries for the week, and not one person in that family had called to ask if I needed help. Now suddenly, I was supposed to liquidate the most important thing I owned because my brother's latest dream was falling apart. I asked her the only question that mattered. Why would I do that? There was a pause on the line, and for just a second I think she understood how insane her request sounded. Then she slipped right into the old script. She said he was my brother. She said family should be there for each other. She said sometimes people have to let go of personal pride when someone they love is in trouble. That was when I stopped her. I asked if she remembered the winter night her husband told me to leave. I asked if she remembered how many birthdays had passed since then without a single text. I asked whether family only counted when Brandon needed money. Before she could answer, I heard my father in the background. He was not trying to stay quiet either. He was already angry, already pacing, already talking like I was the one doing something wrong. Then his voice cut through the phone so clearly I did not need speaker to hear it. Family is family, Audrey. His tone was sharp and familiar, full of that same old certainty that had once made me doubt my own pain. But this time, it did not work. This time I was standing on my own deck, in a life I had built without any of them, and all I felt was clarity. My mother kept talking, now faster, now more desperate. She said Brandon had investors to satisfy, bills piling up, and a bank pressing hard. She said if I acted quickly, I could save him from losing everything. I looked out at the water and realized that none of them had called because they missed me. They had not seen a daughter in that photo. They had seen an asset, something valuable, something they could reach for. I told her no, not maybe, not let me think about it, just no. My father exploded. He started shouting about gratitude, blood, loyalty, and everything a daughter supposedly owed the people who raised her. I let him finish, then I hung up. For about 10 seconds, the marina was quiet again. Then the messages started coming in. My mother texted first, trying to sound wounded. Brandon followed with a long message about pressure, bad timing, and how I did not understand what was at stake. Then my father sent one sentence that managed to sound both furious and offended at the same time. "We need to settle this in person." I read it once, locked my phone, and set it face down beside me. I should have known then that they were not going to let it go. What I did not know yet was that 3 days later, they would be standing in California, looking at my yacht like it already belonged to them. 3 days later, I found out just how far my family was willing to go when they thought there was something left to take from me. I was at the marina early that morning going over a weekend charter schedule, coffee in one hand, clipboard in the other, trying to focus on work instead of the string of unanswered messages they had been sending since the call. I had already decided I was done responding. I had said no. In my mind, that should have been the end of it. Then the dock manager walked toward me with that careful expression people wear when they are about to deliver news they know you are not going to like. He told me there were 3 people at the front gate asking for me by name. He asked if I was expecting family from out of town. The second he said family, I knew. I did not even have to turn around right away. Something in me had already gone cold. When I finally looked up, there they were, my mother, my father, and Brandon, standing just beyond the gate in clothes that looked too heavy for California, like they had brought Pittsburgh with them. My mother was clutching her purse with both hands, already wearing the kind of strained, fragile expression she used when she wanted to look like the victim before anyone had even spoken. My father stood rigid beside her, jaw tight, scanning the marina like he was assessing property. And Brandon was doing exactly what I knew he would do. He was not looking at me. He was looking past me, toward the yacht. At that moment, more than anything they had said on the phone, I understood why they had come. This was never about reconnecting. It was never about regret. It was about what I had, what they needed, and whether they could still pressure me into handing it over. I should have turned around and left them at that gate. Honestly, part of me wishes I had, but another part of me, the part that had spent 3 years replaying every silence, every rejection, every night I had wondered what I had done to deserve being discarded, wanted to hear them say it to my face. So I told the dock manager it was fine and walked over. My mother said my name the second I got close enough, like she had been practicing how soft to make it sound. Then she reached for me. Not a full hug, just a small dramatic movement with both arms, enough to perform affection without risking that I might not return it. I stepped back before she could touch me. Brandon looked uncomfortable for half a second, but it vanished the moment his eyes landed on the yacht again. My father gave me one short nod like we were about to discuss a business matter. That was the first thing that really struck me. None of them looked ashamed. Not one of them looked like a person who had crossed the country to make amends. They looked tense, yes. Desperate, definitely. But not sorry. My mother started with small talk so fake it was almost insulting. She said San Diego looked beautiful. She said I looked healthy. She said she had always known I was strong. My father cut her off and asked if we could go somewhere private to talk. Brandon finally looked at me and said they had not come all this way to argue in a parking lot. That line almost made me laugh. 3 years of silence, one demand for money, and now suddenly I was supposed to care how comfortable this conversation felt for them. I told them they had 5 minutes. My father looked offended immediately, like I was being rude to guests instead of setting boundaries with people who had erased me from their lives. My mother's eyes filled with tears so quickly it was almost impressive. She said they were in crisis. She said they needed compassion. She said, whatever happened in the past, we were still family. Brandon finally stepped in with what I guess he thought was the reasonable version of the pitch. He told me the business was in trouble because of expansion costs, vendor debt, payroll pressure, and a loan that had gotten bigger than expected. He said if he could just stabilize things for a few months, he could turn everything around. He said selling one yacht would not ruin my life, but refusing to help could ruin his. That was when I realized they had spent the entire flight building a story in which I was the selfish one. Not the brother who overreached, not the parents who backed him at everyone else's expense. Me, the daughter they had ignored until there was something to gain. I looked at all three of them and asked the question none of them wanted to answer. If I had posted a picture from a studio apartment instead of a yacht, would any of you be standing here right now? Nobody said a word. My mother looked down. My father's face hardened. Brandon shifted his weight and glanced away. That silence told me everything, but they still were not finished. My father said this conversation needed to happen somewhere less public, and before I could answer, Brandon looked straight at the yacht and asked if we could talk on board. Not ask, really. Assume. Like he already saw himself there. Like the life I built had become family property the moment they laid eyes on it. I should have said no right then. Instead, I looked at them for a long second and made a different choice. I told them they could come aboard for 10 minutes. No more. I wanted them in that space for one reason only. I wanted them to sit inside the proof of everything they had once decided I would never become. As we walked down the dock, I could feel all three of them taking it in. My mother kept glancing around with that tight, overwhelmed expression people wear when they are trying to calculate what something costs. My father's silence turned heavier with every step. And Brandon, who had barely looked me in the eye since arriving, could not stop staring at the yacht, like he was already imagining what selling it might do for him. By the time we stepped onto the deck, I knew this was not going to end with a peaceful conversation. It was going to end with the truth, and none of them were ready for how much of it I had saved up. The moment they stepped onto my yacht, I could see the truth all over their faces. My mother looked around in stunned silence. My father started sizing up the space like it was something he could still claim authority over. And Brandon barely looked at me at all. He was too busy staring at everything I had built. I let them sit, but I stayed standing. My mother tried first. She said Brandon was under pressure. She said the business was in trouble. She said families go through hard seasons and sometimes people need to put the past behind them. My father was less subtle. He said Brandon needed money immediately and that a yacht was a luxury, which meant it could be sold. Brandon finally named the number they wanted, then launched into excuses about debt, payroll, bad expansion, and lenders closing in. I listened to all of it, then asked one simple question. Where was this family loyalty when I was sleeping on someone's couch after you threw me out? Nobody answered, so I did. I reminded them what those years actually looked like. Working double shifts, getting sick alone, spending birthdays by myself, learning how to survive without a single call, text, or dollar from any of them. My mother started crying. My father got angry. Brandon called me bitter. Then I put a folder on the table and slid it toward them. I told them I had already committed most of this year's company profits to the Harbor Light Initiative, a foundation I created to help young women who had been abandoned by their families. I also told them the yacht was protected under my business structure. So no, I would not be selling it to rescue Brandon from a mess he created himself. Brandon stared at me like he could not believe what he was hearing. My father asked if I was really choosing strangers over my own family. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "No, I'm choosing people who know exactly what it feels like to be thrown away." That was the moment all three of them realized they were leaving with nothing. My father called me cold. Brandon called me selfish. My mother acted like I was punishing them. But I was done explaining. I pointed toward the door and told them the truth. They had not come for their daughter. They had come for an asset. And now they needed to leave like the strangers they had spent 3 years becoming. After they walked off my yacht, I stood on the dock for a long time and watched them disappear into the parking lot without looking back. My mother kept dabbing at her eyes like she still could not understand how this had happened. My father's shoulders were stiff with the kind of anger he used when life stopped obeying him, and Brandon looked lost, but not in a way that made me feel sorry for him. He looked like a man who had spent too many years believing someone else would always step in before consequences became real. That was the last time I saw all three of them together, and deep down, I think we all knew it. Something had ended on that yacht, and it was never going to be rebuilt with a few guilty phone calls and another demand disguised as family loyalty. Over the next 2 weeks, they kept trying. My mother sent long texts about forgiveness and second chances. My father left one voicemail telling me I would regret turning my back on blood. Brandon sent a message that was somehow angry and desperate at the same time, saying I had no idea what I had done to him. I blocked every number, every account, every new attempt. I was done giving people access to me just because they shared my last name. A few months later, the rest unfolded exactly the way I had expected, only worse. Brandon's business did not recover. It collapsed. The second location closed first because he had expanded too fast and signed a lease he could never really support. Then the original shop started missing payments too. Vendors came after him. Employees quit when paychecks got shaky. The lender stopped offering extensions and moved straight into collection. All those years, my parents had treated him like the future of the family, like every bad decision was just one more step before greatness. And in the end, it all came down the way unstable things always do: fast, loud, and expensive. What made it worse was that my parents had tied themselves to him financially so many times they could no longer pretend his failures belonged only to him. My father had signed on one of the business loans. My mother had pushed to use home equity to help him bridge a rough season. They had spent years protecting him from consequences, and now the consequences had finally found all of them at once. When the bank came for repayment, they could not cover it. They tried to refinance, then tried to sell assets, then tried begging relatives for help, but by then too many people knew the truth. The house in the Pittsburgh suburbs, the one my father had always treated like proof that he had built a respectable life, had to be sold under pressure. Not because they wanted to downsize, not because they were starting fresh, because they had run out of room to pretend everything was fine. They sold fast, for less than they should have gotten, and moved into a small rental that could barely hold all the things they had once looked down on other people for living without. I heard later that my father took it the hardest. Losing money upset him, but losing status humiliated him. For years, he had spoken like a man who believed good decisions belonged to him by nature. Suddenly, people in their circle knew the son he bragged about had failed. The daughter he ignored wanted nothing to do with them. And the house he took pride in was gone. My mother's version of punishment looked different. She became the person always trying to explain the story in a way that made her sound softer than she had been. According to relatives, she said the family had gone through a misunderstanding. She said too much stress had damaged everyone. She said I had become distant and hard. But the more she talked, the less sympathy she got, because people had started putting the pieces together. They remembered how often she had praised Brandon and how rarely she mentioned me. They remembered the way I disappeared from family conversations and how nobody ever gave a clear answer why. Some believed her, at least at first, but enough of them did not. Enough of them saw what had happened and quietly pulled back. That was part of the price too. Not just the money, not just the house, the loss of the image they had spent years protecting. Brandon, from what I heard, became bitter in the ugliest way. He blamed everyone except himself. He blamed the economy, his staff, the lender, the timing, my father's advice, my mother's pressure, and of course, me. Especially me. In his version of events, I had betrayed the family at the exact moment he needed me most. But that was the problem with Brandon. He still thought need created entitlement. He still believed someone else should absorb the impact of his choices if he wanted something badly enough. Without the business, without the praise, without my parents constantly patting the ground beneath him, he had no idea who he was. And for the first time in his life, nobody could fix that for him. While their world was shrinking, mine kept opening up. The Harbor Light Initiative became more than paperwork, and pain turned into purpose. It started helping real people. A 19-year-old who had been thrown out after aging out of the system and had nowhere to stay. A young woman whose parents cut her off after she refused to give them control of her paycheck. A college student trying to stay enrolled after losing housing overnight. Small grants, emergency groceries, temporary hotel stays, transportation to interviews, legal referrals, practical help, fast help, the kind of help that matters when your whole life can tip in a week. Every time I signed another approval or heard that someone had made it through one more month because they finally had support, I felt something in me heal that anger alone never could have touched. My company grew too, but in a steadier way. I stopped chasing success just to prove someone wrong. I started building for peace, better bookings, smarter expansion, stronger contracts, fewer risks, more intention. The yacht that once triggered all of this became part of the life I loved, not because it was expensive, but because it reminded me what survival looks like when you refuse to let rejection define you. A few more messages reached me over time through cousins, mutual contacts, and people who thought they were helping. My mother wanted one conversation. My father wanted closure. Brandon wanted me to understand how hard things had been for him. I ignored all of it, not because I was cruel, because I had finally learned the difference between compassion and self-betrayal. You can wish people healing without reopening the door they once used to hurt you. You can let them live with the consequences of their choices without becoming the villain in your own rescue story. That was the real ending, not the loss of the house or the collapse of the business, though I will admit there was a certain justice in all of that. The real ending was simpler and stronger. They lost the daughter they thought they could always come back to when convenient. They lost access. They lost control. They lost the right to tell themselves I would always be there waiting to be used one more time. And I gained something far more valuable than revenge. I gained certainty. I know who I am without their approval. I know what I survived without their help. And I know now that the most satisfying ending is not watching toxic people fall apart. It is building a life so honest, stable, and meaningful that their chaos can no longer reach you. If this story has any lesson at all, it is this. Family is not proven by blood when things are easy. It is proven by who shows up when you are struggling, when you are inconvenient, when there is nothing to gain from loving you. The people who abandoned me taught me one painful truth, but they also pushed me toward a better one. Your worth does not shrink just because the wrong people failed to see it. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop begging to be valued by those who only notice you when you become useful. And sometimes the sweetest revenge is not destroying the people who hurt you. It is refusing to let them keep you from becoming someone whole. At Revenge Argon, our team works hard to create meaningful, engaging stories that are not only entertaining, but also rich in life lessons. We are committed to making it clear that these are fictional stories, created to deliver educational messages, valuable insights, and positive lessons to our viewers. After hearing the story, tell us which character stood out to you the most and why. Also, let us know what kind of story theme you want Revenge Argon to create next, because your ideas can inspire our next video.